If you enjoy our content and think this is important material, the best compliment you can pay is by sharing this with your friends and family. This helps us out a lot. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We would love to hear from you. Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello, today we have Dr. Torres interviewing John about using probability correctly in supporting Christianity. John is specifically looking at claims from Dr. Bart Ehrman and evangelical scholars who use probability to either prove or disprove Christianity. We are continuing from the previous episode. We hope you enjoy.
So if William Lane Craig is correct in what he says, then we should think that Jesus was being unreasonable here. Because Craig says it's unreasonable to demand logically demonstrative proofs as a precondition for making a religious commitment, whereas Jesus said, if I'm not bringing these logically demonstrative proofs, you shouldn't make that religious commitment to me. And this runs throughout Scripture. This is what sets Jesus apart from all other religious leaders and claimants. He alone proved his claim. He didn't expect people to believe him without logically demonstrative proofs, up to and including his resurrection. He didn't consider that unreasonable, rather the opposite. It would be unreasonable to make the commitment without some solid basis for it. So we can go with Jesus on this, or we can go with the philosopher apologists. I'll go with Jesus. Now, when Craig says this, perhaps he realizes it's a bit unsettling, so he adds this. If we can only show Christianity to be probably true, nevertheless we can, on the basis of the Spirit's witness, know Christianity to be true with a deep assurance that far outstrips what the evidence in our particular situation might support. What's wrong with that?
Can you rephrase that? It's a bit long.
It's saying it doesn't matter if you can't be sure, you can't know on the basis of evidence. You have the Spirit's witness inside you, and so that way you will be deeply assured that it's true, even if the evidence is not enough to support that.
Well, I think once you're challenged, it might shake your faith.
Yes, that's a problem. The other problem is this is what Mormons, for example, do. Mormons' great testimony for their religion, if you ask them, is they felt a burning in the bosom.
But it could be hard to burn.
It could be.
Eating.
It could be. But this is what they'll tell you. I know that Mormonism is true, and I know that Joseph Smith is a true prophet because I felt the burning in the bosom. I certainly am not discounting the witness of the Spirit, but it's not what Jesus said. He didn't say, believe in me, and then you'll have this witness inside you and you will know it. That's always subjective. The Mormons really believe in the false doctrines of Mormonism. They believe that there are millions of gods. They believe that they will become a god one day because they feel this burning in the bosom, which they believe is coming from God. I believe the Spirit's witness, but I believe that because I believe it's true because of the evidence Jesus gave. Jesus never said, rely on your subjective feeling, your internal assurance to know that I'm true. He said, if I do not do the works, do not believe me. And it gets worse, actually, when we turn to yet another of these philosopher apologists, a certain very highly respected Alvin Plantinga. As Craig explains it on the Talbot School of Theology blog, answering a question posed on September 11th, 2020, he says this: Alvin Plantinga criticized the historical argument because of the problem of dwindling probabilities. Plantinga explains that an explanatory hypothesis like, quote, God raised Jesus from the dead, unquote, is not just a single hypothesis. Rather, you are also supposing that God exists, that God would want to reveal himself in the world, that Jesus of Nazareth lived and made certain radical claims about himself, as well as that God raised him from the dead to vindicate those radical claims. This is really a series of hypotheses. And he says, so suppose we want to calculate the probability of these hypotheses, given the evidence and background information. Remember, you can't know any of these. You can only have a certain degree of probability that they're true. So he says, you need to calculate the probability of these hypotheses. First of all, you need to calculate the probability that God exists. After that, you would need to calculate not only the probability that God exists, but also the probability that God would want to reveal himself in the world. Then on top of that, you need to calculate the probability that Jesus lived and made certain radical claims about himself. Finally, you need to figure, in addition to these hypotheses, the probability that God raised Jesus from the dead. The probability that all of these hypotheses are true is the product of all of the probabilities multiplied together. Plantinga says even if each one of these hypotheses has a very high probability, say 90%, nevertheless, as you multiply these probabilities together, the probability that they are all true dwindles. For 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9 is 0.66. The probability gets smaller and smaller until finally it may turn out that you actually get to less than 50%. Your probability may turn out to be very small. As a result, the hypothesis of Jesus' resurrection may turn out to be not very probable at all. So Plantinga doesn't think that we should base our belief in Jesus' resurrection on historical evidence. Let me read that last line again. Plantinga doesn't think that we should base our belief in Jesus' resurrection on historical evidence. Do you have anything to say to that?
Well, I think all this calculation of probabilities is just extremely ridiculous. First, it is impossible for them to put a number that God exists. Where are you going to pull the numbers out of? What's the denominator? Secondly, even if you're able to fabricate all these numbers and multiply them together, multiplying all these fractions is going to, of course, get you a product that's less than the original numbers. But are you saying that you're saying that there can never be a miracle? A miracle would be an extremely improbable event. And that's what Christians are saying. It's a miracle. Nobody's saying that it's a probable thing that someone rises from the dead.
Yes. Unfortunately, what Plantinga is saying is utter nonsense. And this is what this philosophical approach of believing that you can never know, you can only have probabilities, leads you to actually saying that we shouldn't base our belief on historical evidence, the very thing that Jesus said we should base it on. And it shows, as you've touched on, and as we'll go into more detail, a complete failure to understand probability and statistics. And we will go over that in detail. But for now, I just wanted to show you where these people are going with this kind of approach. Now, Craig tries to fix the problem. So he continues in this blog post. Fortunately, Timothy McGrew, who is a Christian philosopher at Western Michigan, has pointed out what the fallacy is. The fallacy is that Plantinga mistakenly holds the evidence constant while he refines the hypothesis. But that is incorrect. When someone says that the probability of the existence of God is 90% given the evidence, he is talking just about the evidence that is relevant to God's existence. In the theistic arguments I defend, based on evidence for the origin of the universe, or the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life, or objective moral values in the world, or the ontological argument, none of those arguments appeals to evidence about Jesus or the Gospels. They appeal to certain general facts of experience, such as moral facts or facts about the origin of the universe, and so forth. When we figure the probability that God exists and that he would want to reveal himself, then we augment that initial evidence with a little more evidence. Similarly, when we ask what the probability is that God exists and would want to reveal himself and Jesus existed, then we add yet more evidence. As long as the evidence keeps increasing as new hypotheses are considered, it doesn't matter that the hypothesis is being further and further refined. Plantinga's mistake was thinking that the evidence is held constant as additional hypotheses are considered. That's not right. As the evidence accumulates, the probability of the conjunction of the hypotheses can actually increase. Given the additional evidence, the probability that God has raised Jesus from the dead could actually be greater than the earlier probability that God exists, because we have added in all the extra evidence pertinent to the further hypotheses. Therefore, Plantinga's objection based upon dwindling probabilities turns out to be misconceived. In all fairness, Plantinga agreed with McGrew's analysis. What do you think of this?
Are you thinking that the so-called fictitious probability should not be multiplied, but they should be additive when you have new evidence? Is that what you're saying? Because I think I'm thinking in terms of, a detective finding evidence for a particular crime, that you would, the more pieces of evidence, hard evidence you find, will strengthen your case, not diminish it.
He's possibly trying to say something like that, but what he's doing is showing that none of these people understand probability at all. Probability, if you have a series of linked events, is it possible ever for the overall probability to be greater than the probability of the least likely event in your chain?
No.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And yet that's what he's saying here, saying given the additional evidence, the probability could actually be greater than the earlier probability. The probability of the conjunction of the hypotheses can actually increase. I'm sorry, that is saying I have no idea how probability works. They don't have probability. He says there's extra evidence coming in with each additional point. Well, those are already factored into the probability calculated for that event. So that's already factored into these probability numbers. You can absolutely not get a greater probability. Plantinga was right in the first place that the probabilities of each of these events, each of which is calculated based on the evidence for that particular claim, have to be multiplied together. When you do that, it does go down, 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 down. Okay, because you know probability. It's just given, that it cannot go down. So let's sum up what we've seen so far. First, skeptics claim that we cannot know what happened in the past, but only talk about what probably happened. And our top philosopher apologists and other apologists agree with this. So at this point, we have to ask the question, where did this idea come from anyway? Where did the idea come from that we cannot know what happened in the past, but only what probably happened?
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but please join us for the next part tomorrow. Same time and same place. Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. We would love to hear from you. Please feel free to share any questions or comments you may have. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, MeWe, and YouTube. Simply search Truth in My Days as one word. Again, Truth in My Days as one word, no spaces in between. And you can connect with us. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com. Thank you.